The sound of shattering glass still echoes in my ears whenever I close my eyes. Grandfather's hand hitting the dining room table with a force that made the silverware jump. The air had been thick with the warmth of roasted turkey, laughter, and the faint scent of cinnamon from Grandma's pie. But in that moment, it froze like a photograph. Everyone around me seemed suspended in shock, their expressions caught between disbelief and fear. While I sat there gripping my fork with a piece of turkey halfway to my mouth, my heart hammering against my ribs like a warning drum. Grandpa, Sydney's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Deliberate and sharp, Emily. Do you realize who owns the company now? His words weren't just surprising, they were seismic, rattling the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my life and my family. For a brief, terrifying second, I wondered if I'd misheard him. If exhaustion or holiday hysteria had conjured some absurd hallucination. But no, the seriousness in his eyes and the way the wine glasses trembled told me this was real. My mind raced, unable to process the simplest truth. The multi-million-dollar cold storage and logistics empire that I thought was decades away from touching my life had somehow become a central pivot in this room, and apparently I was supposed to own it. My fingers tightened around the silver fork as if it could anchor me to reality. And I whispered, "Grandpa, I don't understand. I don't own anything. How could I?" My voice sounded small and fragile against the storm of tension that had replaced the warmth of our holiday gathering. Every eye in the room flickered to me, Dad's hands white-knuckled on the carving knife, Mom's face drained of color, my brother's wife, Tegan, sitting stiffly, her hands folded over her lap like she was praying for invisibility. Grandpa reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, the edges worn but the contents pristine, and slid it toward me across the polished wood. He didn't speak at first, letting the tension suffocate the room, giving every one of us a moment to realize the weight of what was coming. Then, in that calm but unrelenting voice, he explained that a business partner had recently called by mistake, assuming he was still running the company, only to mention a man named Daniel Carter as the current owner, the same empire that had been ostensibly mine in name. My chest tightened as confusion collided with disbelief. My thoughts spiraled back 4 years to my post-college apartment in Houston, the cramped, airless room I called home, surviving on instant noodles and whatever scraps I could stretch to fill the month. I had struggled, scraping together temp jobs, interviewing endlessly, never dreaming that behind closed doors, my family was orchestrating a shadow game I wasn't invited to play. And now here it was, laid bare. Legal documents fanned across the table like a cruel revelation, proving a truth I couldn't even begin to reconcile with the life I thought I was leading. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The holiday decorations suddenly feeling ironic against the backdrop of this personal earthquake. Grandpa's eyes locked onto mine, unwavering, and I felt that icy certainty settle in my bones. This wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding. This was something far more calculated, and for the first time in my life, I realized that the people I thought I could trust most were capable of a betrayal that ran deeper than I could have imagined. I slowly lowered my fork, letting my hands rest limply on my lap, my mind still spinning from the revelation. Grandpa Sydney's stare didn't waver. It was calm but carried the weight of someone who had watched far too many mistakes unfold and refused to let another slide. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "this isn't something that happened overnight. I set things in motion years ago, but the details were handled without your knowledge." My heartbeat stuttered as I tried to parse the words. My knowledge? My ownership? The life I'd built for myself. Every painstaking step after college suddenly felt overshadowed by a shadow empire I had no access to, no say in, no part of until now. It seemed because this folder, these documents, were screaming the truth in a language I was only just learning to read. My parents sat frozen, exchanging subtle glances that held just enough tension to betray a nervous alliance. Dad, Barry, whose tone was usually a calm anchor in stormy family debates, looked off at the table, tight-lipped, as if searching for a way to justify the impossible. Mom, ever the conciliator, clasped her hands together and took a deep, uneven breath. Her eyes glossed over with tears she was valiantly trying to restrain. My younger brother Knox's face was pale, jaw tight and Tegan silent, almost invisible beside him, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding my gaze. The room was suffocating. Every heartbeat magnified in the silence that followed Grandpa's words. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, to tear through the polite layers of avoidance and protective excuses I could already sense, forming like armor around them. Grandpa, I said finally, my voice steady despite the trembling inside. I don't understand. I've worked hard, struggled, lived paycheck to paycheck. How could this company, this empire be in my name and I didn't even know? His hands rested flat on the table, the briefcase still open between us, and he leaned in slightly, voice low but unflinching. But at 22, inexperienced and vulnerable, the family had collectively decided to oversee operations, temporarily, as they put it, shielding me from the pressures of responsibility that could destroy everything before I had a chance to learn. The explanation should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. Every word was a reminder that the gift I had thought of as potential and inheritance meant for me had been converted into a secret ledger of decisions I wasn't allowed to touch, choices made without consultation, and it now seemed, for reasons I hadn't considered, financial survival, protection, control. I felt a cold knot in my stomach, the mix of betrayal and disbelief thickening the air, making the Christmas lights above feel less celebratory and more like a theater of illusions. I realized, with a sinking sense of clarity, that the people I had trusted to guide me, to love me, to prepare me for life, had decided they knew better than I did. They had acted as guardians over a kingdom I should have ruled, turning their decisions into walls, not lessons. And as Grandpa's eyes held mine, I understood the gravity of what had been withheld. The years lost, the opportunities denied, and the silent reshaping of my reality without my consent. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what it meant to be betrayed by the very people who claimed to act in my best interest. The silence in the room stretched so long that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like a drum against my ribcage. Every breath felt heavy, like I was inhaling a storm of disbelief and betrayal. I kept my eyes on Grandpa Sidney, trying to read him, but there was no anger in his face, no trace of the Christmas cheer that had filled this room just moments before. Instead, there was the sharp, quiet determination of someone who had prepared for them worst and refused to let the truth remain buried any longer. He gestured toward the folder again, and I hesitated before picking up the top document. The paper felt weighty, almost alive, as though it carried the consequences of every year that had passed without my knowledge. I scanned the legal language, the signatures, the dates, and felt the room shift beneath me. Names I had never imagined seeing in connection with me stared back. David Carter, listed as the official owner, with financial transfers traced meticulously to accounts that my parents controlled. My fingers trembled slightly, though I tried to keep it hidden, my voice faltering when I finally spoke. I don't understand. Why would you? My words broke as I searched for clarity, for some fragment of explanation that could make this all make sense. Grandpa leaned back, his hands clasped calmly on the table. Emily, it was never meant to happen this way. You were young, bright, and capable, but the world is not kind to inexperience. We only wanted to protect you from mistakes that could have cost everything. I oversaw your inheritance, and the rest of the family helped manage operations temporarily, or so I thought. The silence returned, heavier this time, as I tried to reconcile his words with the reality laid bare in front of me. My parents exchanged subtle glances, their expressions unreadable, while Knox shifted uneasily in his chair, avoiding eye contact, and Tegan stayed quiet, her hands folded tightly on her lap. Every detail Grandpa spoke of seemed calculated to soothe, yet it only deepened the ache of betrayal. Years of decisions, withheld information, and secret oversight that had shaped my life without consent were suddenly thrown into sharp relief. I thought of my early days in Houston, living in a tiny, cramped apartment, scraping by on temp jobs, surviving summer heat with a broken AC, dreaming of opportunities that were systematically blocked by my own family. And now, here I was, faced with evidence that the empire I had never touched, that I had never even been allowed to manage, had been quietly sold, transferred, and controlled under the names of people I trusted most. I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of grief and rising anger. The betrayal so tangible it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. Grandpa's voice softened, almost imperceptibly, as he continued to explain the details of the initial oversight, the mistakes made by their partners, and the reasoning behind temporary control. But the more he spoke, the more I realized that their protection had become a prison, a carefully constructed cage that kept me from the life, opportunities, and independence I had been meant to claim. The festive lights on the tree, once cheerful and warm, now felt mocking, casting shadows across faces contorted with regret, fear, and uncertainty. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be betrayed by the people closest to you, the ones who had shaped your childhood, your dreams, and your sense of trust. And in that moment, I resolved that I would not let their choices define the rest of my life. Grandpa Sidney's calm demeanor was almost maddening, like a steel anchor in the middle of a hurricane I hadn't seen coming. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the papers, but my mind was racing 1,000 directions at once. I thought about every sleepless night after college, every rejection email I had received, every opportunity that seemed just out of reach, and how, now it was all starting to make a disturbing kind of sense. My family's protection had been a carefully orchestrated suppression of my independence, a plan to shield me from responsibility. That instead became a control system, siphoning away the life I thought I was building. I looked at my parents, searching for a crack in their expressions, for any flicker of genuine remorse. But instead, I found carefully constructed defenses, voices ready to justify, eyes trained to deflect. Dad's face was taut, jaw tight, and his hands hovered over the table as though he wanted to reach for something, but the words never came. Mom's composure wavered in the slightest, her fingers fiddling with her napkin as if it could anchor her to a reality she had helped distort. Knox, pale and stiff, avoided eye contact entirely, while Tegan seemed almost invisible, shrinking into the corner of her chair. I felt my anger simmering beneath the surface, a coiled energy that demanded release, yet I knew the room wouldn't allow for confrontation without it tearing everything apart. Grandpa, sensing the rising tension, didn't raise his voice or wave a finger. He simply laid another set of documents across the table: financial records, emails, and detailed logs showing the transfers, the decisions made in my name, and the orchestration of the sale to David Carter. The evidence was meticulous, methodical, and damning. My hands shook as I sifted through the pages, each one revealing more of the plan, each one a confirmation that their version of protection had been a series of manipulations. I realized then that the theft wasn't just financial, it was the theft of my trust, my confidence, and years of potential growth that had been redirected into decisions. I had no voice. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker, as I processed the implications. Grandpa's eyes never left mine, his silence insisting I confront the truth fully before speaking. I took a slow, deliberate breath and let my voice rise. Not in anger, but in clarity. I understand now. I see what you did. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves, your control, your comfort at the cost of my future. The words trembled slightly, raw and unpolished, but they carried the weight of all the sleepless nights, the disappointment and the unacknowledged pain I had carried alone. Grandpa's gaze softened just slightly, a faint acknowledgement of the inevitability I had arrived at on my own. I could see the hesitation ripple through my family as I spoke, their defenses tightening even as the truth pressed down on them. I realized that this moment was pivotal, not just a confrontation about ownership or betrayal, but the first step in reclaiming the life I had been denied. And as I looked around the table at the people who had betrayed me under the eyes of care, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A spark of resolve, a glimmer of clarity that the next steps would be mine and mine alone. The folder in front of me seemed heavier now, not with paper, but with the weight of years stolen and the responsibility that had been denied to me. I could feel it pressing into my palms as I turned the pages again, retracing every wire transfer, every signature, every document that connected my name to a future I had never been allowed to claim. Grandpa's presence at the table was grounding, steadying, like a lighthouse in a storm I hadn't realized I was in. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer excuses, only let the evidence speak for itself while the rest of the room fumbled for words that couldn't undo what had already happened. Dad opened his mouth several times, but no sound came out. And Mom's trembling fingers betrayed her panic as she tried to rearrange the papers, as if shifting them around could somehow erase the truth. Knox's head hung low, a mixture of shame and fear radiating from him, while Tegan's silence was deafening, each glance she gave me carrying a weight of unspoken acknowledgement. The magnitude of the betrayal hit me fully then. This wasn't a single lapse or a moment of weakness. It was a coordinated effort, meticulously executed over years to control, limit, and redirect a life that belonged to me. I thought of the countless job applications I had sent, the interviews I had prepared for in the small Houston apartment I had worked tirelessly to maintain, and the doors that had mysteriously closed. Now seeing them for what they were, not coincidence, but sabotage. My voice, when it came, was quiet but unwavering. Everything I've fought for, every ounce of independence I've tried to carve out, was manipulated, redirected, stolen. Grandpa's expression softened almost imperceptibly, a faint nod acknowledging the pain and the truth in my words. I could see him wrestling with a deep regret, a realization that the protective measures meant to shield me had instead stifled me. My family tried to respond, but the words felt hollow. Too little, too late. Dad's attempts at explanations sounded rehearsed, defensive. Mom's protests were punctuated by sobs and nervous gestures. Knox's brief admissions only confirmed my worst suspicions. Even Tegan, quiet and withdrawn, couldn't offer anything that altered the reality before us. And as I sat there, absorbing the full scope of their deception, I realized something crucial. My path forward didn't require their permission or approval. Every decision, every opportunity that had been denied to me could now be reclaimed on my terms. Grandpa finally spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. Emily, you have every right to reclaim what is yours. This is more than legal ownership. It's your life, your legacy, and your future. His words anchored me, giving clarity where confusion had reigned. I could feel the anger, the betrayal, and the hurt coalescing into determination. The room, once filled with holiday cheer and laughter, now echoed with the gravity of confrontation. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had clarity, and with clarity came power. I knew what needed to be done: reclaim control, rebuild what was rightfully mine, and hold those responsible accountable. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I felt fully capable of taking charge of a life that had been stolen and turning it into something stronger, smarter, and entirely my own. That Christmas, the warmth of family was gone, replaced by the cold precision of truth, but from that chill emerged resolve, a determination that would guide every step I took moving forward. The following weeks blurred into a haze of research, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. I retreated to the small office in my Houston apartment, the space I had used for freelance projects and temp job paperwork, transforming it into a war room where every shred of evidence could be cataloged, cross-referenced, and prepared for legal scrutiny. Grandpa Sidney became my silent partner, showing up each morning with coffee and quiet guidance, his presence reassuring yet unobtrusive. I learned quickly how much preparation mattered. The signatures had to be verified, the wire transfers traced, the emails and documents authenticated. Every step was painstaking, exhausting, but it was also empowering. I was no longer the passive observer of my life being manipulated. I was taking control in a way I had never imagined possible. The emotional toll was intense. I wrestled with anger, betrayal, and grief, often finding myself staring blankly at the papers for hours, trying to process the years that had been taken from me. Nights were the hardest. Houston's summer heat pressed against the windows of my office, and sleep came in fragmented bursts as my mind replayed every slight, every hidden action, every moment I had unknowingly been blocked or redirected. And yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a fierce exhilaration too, the realization that I had the power, the tools, and the resolve to reclaim what was mine. I began drafting letters to lawyers, compiling affidavits, and organizing evidence in meticulous folders. Every document, every timestamp, every trace of digital history became a piece of the puzzle. My family had assumed their actions were unassailable, that the deception would remain hidden behind their careful explanations and protective narrative. They underestimated me. I was young, yes, but I was determined, resourceful, and fueled by a need for justice that had been simmering quietly beneath years of confusion and frustration. Grandpa observed my progress with a quiet pride that I couldn't ignore. He offered insight into business practices, legal procedures, and negotiation tactics, but he never interfered, letting me lead. That was the first taste of autonomy I had experienced in years, making decisions, strategizing next moves, and setting the pace without anyone overriding me or dictating outcomes. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. I could see the patterns of control, the financial maneuvers, and the emails that had deliberately blocked opportunities, and I realized the scope of the deception was larger than I had feared. Yet, at the same time, there was clarity in that realization. Understanding the full extent of what had been done to me stripped away confusion and replaced it with a blueprint for action. My nights became a rhythm of research and reflection, drafting questions for depositions, coordinating with legal experts, and compiling every shred of information that would validate my claim. And through it all, the anger transformed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming autonomy, demonstrating that the person they tried to suppress could rise, take control, and rebuild. Each evening, I would close the apartment blinds, sit back in my chair, and let the quiet of the night sink in. The hum of the city outside, a distant reminder that life moves forward regardless of the chaos we endure. And I realized for the first time that the path ahead wasn't just about reclaiming the company, it was about reclaiming myself. The first court date arrived like a storm I had spent months preparing for, but no amount of preparation could erase the knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach. Downtown Houston was buzzing, the glass and steel courthouse looming above like a silent judge in itself. Grandpa Sidney drove me there, his calm presence a stark contrast to the adrenaline coursing through me. I carried my meticulously organized folders, every document, email, and record a testament to the years of manipulation and the effort I had poured into uncovering the truth. As we entered the courtroom, the air felt dense, heavy with anticipation, and I could see the faces of my parents and siblings in the gallery tents, unsure, perhaps finally, realizing that their carefully constructed narratives were about to be exposed under the unforgiving light of scrutiny. The proceedings began formally, with lawyers presenting procedural motions, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. Relief, because the process was moving forward. and terror, because every step of this legal journey would force me to relive years of betrayal and suppressed ambition. The deposition phase was grueling. I sat under the intense glare of attorneys, answering questions I already knew the answers to, carefully recounting every detail of my interactions or lack thereof with the company that had ostensibly belonged to me. My voice remained calm, measured, though inside I was reliving sleepless nights, missed opportunities, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Grandpa was in the gallery, eyes tracking my every word, offering subtle nods that grounded me when doubt crept in. He didn't speak, but his quiet presence reminded me I wasn't alone, that someone had my back in a way that was steady, loyal, and earned. The cross-examinations were particularly draining. My parents' attorneys tried to frame the narrative as protective intent, arguing that the decisions made in my absence were in my best interest. I could feel the subtle smirks, the assumptions that I wouldn't catch inconsistencies, that I would falter under pressure, but I held firm. Every timeline, every document, every digitally traced email countered their claims. The more I spoke, the more cracks appeared in their defenses, and I realized that control wasn't just about ownership. It was about the narrative they tried to impose on my life. The courtroom became a battleground, with every word a strategic maneuver, every pause a test of endurance. Hours blurred into days as the hearings dragged on, my mental and emotional stamina tested to the limits. But through it all, there was clarity. Each admission, each acknowledgement of withheld information was a step closer to reclaiming what had been denied to me. Outside the courtroom, I began planning the next phase of rebuilding my professional life. One researched local logistics contacts, potential investors, and ways to reclaim not just the financial assets, but the autonomy and credibility that had been stolen. It was exhausting, and at times, despair threatened to creep in. But I reminded myself why I had started this journey, not for revenge, not for pride, but to reclaim my life on my own terms. And in that, there was an emerging strength I hadn't known existed within me before this trial, a realization that the person who had been hidden beneath years of control, doubt, and manipulation was finally stepping into the light. The settlement finally came after months of grueling legal wrangling, each day feeling like a tug of war between vindication and exhaustion. Sitting in the attorney's office, I felt a strange mixture of relief and frustration. The compensation and partial restitution weren't the full empire I had been denied, but they were a foundation, a platform to reclaim my life and career. Grandpa Sidney, ever my quiet anchor, placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, his eyes reflecting a pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. I realized that the legal battle wasn't just about, and who aideth money or titles. It was about reclaiming agency over my own existence, reasserting the life that had been manipulated by those I loved. Outside the courtroom, the fallout for my family was swift and undeniable. Dad's construction business collapsed under the combined weight of debt and legal fees, forcing a liquidation that erased decades of work. Mom and Dad sold the house that had been home for years, a physical reminder of what had been lost, moving into a smaller rental where holiday lights were sparse and laughter forced. Knox faced probation and restitution, financial strain reflecting the gravity of the schemes he had orchestrated. With my parents' tacit approval, while Tegan filed for divorce midway through the proceedings, seeking distance from the fallout and the professional repercussions she had endured. Despite the devastation around me, I felt a clarity I had never experienced before. The company I had once thought unreachable, the life I had been denied, could now be rebuilt, this time entirely on my terms. I poured every dollar from the settlement into starting a smaller logistics venture focused on refrigerated storage for local farmers, restaurants, and small food distributors. The early months were brutal, testing my resilience with long days, sleepless nights, and near constant problem solving to secure leases. purchase refrigerated trailers, and find loyal staff. I cold called potential clients, attended trade shows, and offered discounted rates to build trust. Every small contract, every successful delivery felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been withheld for so long. Grandpa remained a consistent presence, offering advice and guidance without overstepping, his wisdom drawn from decades of experience but always deferring to my decisions. Slowly, stability returned. Repeat contracts emerged. Cash flow improved and my team grew. Loyal employees responding to my leadership style, which valued transparency, integrity, and accountability, the very qualities that had been denied me for years outside the office. I began quietly, sharing my story anonymously on online forums dedicated to those who had experienced financial betrayal or family manipulation. Messages trickled in, people from across the country recounting their experiences, seeking guidance, and sometimes asking for advice on navigating legal and personal recovery. It was humbling, painful, and empowering to offer insight drawn from my own journey, guiding others to reclaim control of their lives while also reaffirming my own resilience. And in those moments, sitting at the small desk of my fledgling company, I understood something fundamental. The life stolen from me could not be replaced, but it could be transformed. I had emerged from betrayal not broken, but sharpened, focused, and more determined than ever to define my own path. The Christmases that followed were quiet, without the tension of old family dynamics, yet they were filled with purpose. The satisfaction of building a life rooted in autonomy, integrity, and self-determination. I realized that freedom, independence, and trust earned through action were far more powerful than any inherited wealth or imposed protection. The following years became a testament to what could grow from resilience and hard-won independence. Emily George, once a young woman unsure of her footing in a world that had been manipulated around her, now stood firmly in control of her own destiny. The logistics company, once a shadow empire managed behind the scenes by her family, had become her creation in every sense. Expanded warehouse facilities, a loyal team, and a growing client base of farmers, restaurants, and small businesses that trusted her for reliable cold storage solutions. Each day began early, with the hum of refrigeration units and the soft chatter of her employees, and ended with careful planning for the next day's deliveries and operations. Grandpa Sidney was still a constant presence, arriving mid-morning with coffee from the local diner, sharing insights from decades of business experience while letting Emily make all the strategic decisions. The lessons he imparted weren't invaluable, but the control was entirely hers, a fact she savored daily. In this new life, Emily also found purpose beyond profit. Her experiences navigating betrayal and fraud inspired her to quietly mentor and guide others who had been victimized by family, deception, or financial exploitation. She offered advice on legal recourse, practical steps for reclaiming stolen assets, and emotional guidance on managing the toll of such betrayals. Messages arrived regularly from a young woman in Oklahoma whose farmland had been illicitly transferred to her brother, to a man in Colorado whose trust distributions had been redirected, to a sister in Florida dealing with an aunt who liquidated shared investments without consent. Emily responded patiently, carefully explaining options, reviewing documents, and offering encouragement without expectation of payment. These connections reminded her that her struggle was not isolated and that her growth could have tangible impact on the lives of others. She blocked contact from her parents and siblings entirely, understanding that forgiveness without accountability was meaningless. Instead, she focused on rebuilding and strengthening the foundation of her own life. Her home and office became sanctuaries of autonomy, filled with reminders of hard-won victories and milestones. The first profitable quarter, new refrigerated trucks, employee appreciation events, and community partnerships with local farms and food banks. Holidays took on new meaning. Christmas was no longer a tense reminder of betrayal, but a quiet celebration of resilience, growth, and the family she chose around her, Grandpa Sidney, loyal employees, and those she had guided through their own recoveries. Emily often reflected on the events that had shaped her. The stolen years, the legal battles, the heartbreak, and the eventual reclamation of her life. Each memory, though painful, had forged a stronger, wiser, and more determined version of herself. She had learned that blood relation alone did not guarantee trust or loyalty, and that the true measure of family was respect, integrity, and shared values, not mere proximity. And in that understanding, she found peace. Emily George had not only reclaimed a business and financial autonomy, but also her sense of self-worth and purpose. From the cold shock of betrayal had emerged a life built on deliberate choices, earned respect, and unwavering independence. The shadows of her past no longer dictated her future. They informed it, shaped it, and ultimately strengthened it. She was no longer the young woman frozen by family, deception at a Christmas dinner. She was the architect of her own empire, a beacon for others, and a woman who had turned adversity into empowerment, building a legacy she could finally call entirely her own.